Smart 24, driving business.
A very warm welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You're watching Smart 24 TV, and we drive your business. This is the point where we talk matters of national importance and concerning daily business, and of course that affect you as an individual back at home and the economy as a whole. My name is Anthony Sebale, and I am your host. Now, today, in a special way, we are talking about the Uganda national debt. Now, debt has become a very contentious issue, especially recently, for example, this year, in the financial year 2020-2023, looking at a 22% increase in the national debt. And comparing these figures, of course, with last year, you're seeing that we had about 56, actually in 2019-2020, we had about 56.39 trillion Ugandan shillings worth of debt. Now that changed in 2020-2021 to over 69.51 trillion Ugandan shillings. Now currently we are talking a debt of over 80 trillion Ugandan shillings in this third quarter of 2022, just a few months away from the national budget. Of course, that was read to us by the Minister of Finance. The debt seems to be increasing, but solutions seem to be narrow, and there seems to be a gap between the policymakers and the people that are actually being affected by the debt. Now, today joining me on set is Madame Nalunga Jen.
Yes.
And she is Executive Director of Siatini,
Yes.
Uganda, and very excited to have her. And she's going to share with us some insights into what the debt solutions could be here in Uganda. Madam Nalunga, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you so much for having me here.
First, tell us about Siatini, Uganda, first of all, before we get into our topic of discussion. I was finding difficult having that in full.
That word,
Yes.
it's a mouthful.
Yes.
You know, those are the days when organizations were formed, and you put in the name whatever you do,
Yes.
you know. So Siatini is Southern and Eastern African Trade, Information and Negotiations Institute. We do work on trade policy, trade, fiscal, and related policies. We are based here in Uganda, but we have a presence in Zimbabwe, and also that's why we are talking about Southern Africa and also Eastern Africa. We do work on policies to ensure that policies work for the people. And we believe that a policy framework is important. And if you go wrong on the policies, the actions and practices will be wrong.
So Siatini, when was it started, and what were the objectives in the first place?
Siatini was started in 1996 in Zimbabwe.
Oh, okay.
The Uganda office was opened in 2002. And our objectives was to build the capacity of stakeholders, from government technocrats to policymakers to civil society to private sector, to effectively engage in trade policies. You know, Anthony, when it comes to trade, like any other policies, by the way, when we talk about a global village, most people think about the phone. You can talk to your friend in the US, like you are here, you know. But when we talk about globalization, we also talk about globalization of policy making. That policies which are made, which are crafted in New York, by Washington by the IMF World Bank, which are crafted in Geneva by the World Trade Organization, which are crafted in Brussels, you know, all those policies will affect us here, up to the household. And what we realized at that time, 1996, that was that the year the World Trade Organization was formed to adjudicate over trade policies throughout globally. And what we realized, the people who started CIATINI, what they realized was that even our technocrats and policymakers were not engaging effectively. In fact, CIATINI started as an organization to build the capacity of technocrats, trade negotiators and policymakers to effectively engage in trade negotiations.
So basically you want to harmonize, for example, African countries in terms of, you know, cross-border trading, creating policies that help people to, you know, transact across borders smoothly without any...
That's one of it, to look at that. But also, for example, trade policies around liberalization. You know, liberalization, opening up your economy.
Yes.
How far should you open your economy? That's a negotiation issue.
True.
And it determines whether you can be able to industrialize and add value on your products or not. Because when you open up, and this is what we did anyway, we opened up very fast, very broad. Things came in, we couldn't compete, and some of our industries collapsed. So we look at such policies. Today, we are negotiating the Continental Free Trade Area, the CFTA. We want to see what is in it for Uganda. You know, how can we effectively trade under the Continental Free Trade Area? We look at, for example, issues of investment policies. Investment policies are also negotiated under the bilateral investment treaties. How do you treat our employers? What do you come with as an investor? What kind of policy can help us to create jobs? But not just jobs, decent jobs. So all those are policy issues.
Financial inclusion, would it be okay?
Financial inclusion, those are fiscal, monetary and fiscal policies. What do you mean by financial inclusion? What kind of policies can make sure that your grandmother, your mother can be able to participate, to access, you know, credit, finance, you know, sustainably affordable finance to be able to do their businesses. And for example, like now, those are challenges which we are having. The banking sector was so liberalized, too liberalized, that we are having challenges. And we'll talk about that when we are talking about debt, because some of those issues are impacting on the debt situation.
Yes. Talking about the debt situation in Uganda, last week, just a few days closing the week, on Thursday to be precise, the Deputy Governor of Bank of Uganda was before a committee of parliament, and he said, in his words, that the debt we are having is sustainable, though there are things that have to be changed. And he spoke that we now have currently a debt of 80 trillion Ugandan shillings, which is 50% of the GDP. And that is, we are speaking of a GDP of 164, 180 now, 180 trillion. And you're looking at his words and they sound unbelievable, because economists all over the world say that whenever GDP exceeds, rather debt exceeds almost half of the GDP, that is something that should call for policy changes. Does this worry you at some point?
It doesn't. Okay, I will tell you why. It's true that our debt has hit that mark, that we have gone beyond the 50% GDP to our debt. And then he talks about being sustainable. We agree that it's a worrying situation. But why is it worrying. For me, it is not because our GDP ratio, because these are just figures. And you remember there was a time when there was a debate around our GDP, whether our GDP has enabled us to enter into middle income. And some people were saying they have used the PPP model to calculate.
Yes.
So these are figures. And I think what's really important is to be able to agree on the measures of our development. How should we measure our development? We'll put that one aside, we'll come back to that. But when it comes to the GDP 50, and then we say, okay, because some people will say that 80 trillion is not the right figure, because the interest rate also keeps rising, because the interest rates are going up. So the 80 trillion might not be the right one. Then some people are saying, in this 80 trillion, you haven't added on government guarantees to private sector. You know, this private sector, when the government guarantees them, the PPPs, government holds the bag, you know. So the situation, Anthony, the situation is not very good. But why? For us, we are saying, when we are looking at the issue of sustainability, we need to use other measures. Because if you are repaying, servicing your debt, and that debt service is higher than what you are spending on your education, human capital development, the entire budget of human capital development, you are spending debt servicing on that. More than you are spending on, because capital development includes education, health, water and sanitation. You add on agriculture, agro-industrialization, agriculture, industry, trade, tourism. So if you are servicing your debt more than you are spending on those core expenditures, then there is a problem. Then two, when your debt repayment is depending on debt servicing, is depending on more borrowing.
You're borrowing to pay the debt.
You borrow from Peter to pay Paul. You borrow from Anthony to pay Paul. You know, you are digging one hole and digging another, covering it with another hole. So for me, I think when we are looking at debt sustainability, that's what we need to look at. Because if we go into GDP, those are moving targets. And somebody like Anthony, you can sit there and you start doing your calculation and say, no, we are okay. You remember there is a time when they rebalanced. Remember the rebalancing. And we went back. You know, they were saying, you know, when we are calculating our gross and GDP, we didn't add in this. That's rebalancing. It's like saying when I was looking at my properties, my court, I gave it a lower value. This court is very expensive. You said the court now is 1 million instead of maybe 100,000. So it always goes up, isn't it? So the whole issue around GDP is problematic. But the issue, I agree, the issue is worrying. And that means when government is servicing that debt, it's taking it away resources from those critical areas which would have helped the country to develop. So it's a worrying situation.
I'm going to ask you just in 1 minute to tell us, for example, why do you think that government is still calling this sustainable in the eyes of the fact that they are considering, okay, the GDP, the debt to GDP ratio, and you're saying that when you look at our budget allocation, which is more stringent, and what we should actually be looking out for, they are underlooking it. Are they missing something when they look at the debt we are having in Uganda?
They are not. It depends on the measures, the yardstick they use. Economists use GDP, they use inflation, you know, those percentages. They use per capita income,
Yes.
you know. So there are those yardsticks which they are using. And we are saying it's okay to use those yardsticks, but it's important we add on more realistic yardsticks to be able, because when you explain to normal people that, you know, don't worry, that debt is okay, sustainable, you know, GDP, say GDP really, what does that mean? So what we are saying, that these yardsticks might be okay because they are more general, they are comparable, you can compare GDP of Uganda, GDP of Kenya, but we need more parameters to be able to assess the situation.
Yes, thank you very much. We are going to come back on that, exactly what we should be looking out for, not just the GDP on the national debt. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still talking the Uganda national debt. It is a worrying situation, though the government is promising that this is sustainable. Like in the past 4 years, like in the past 5 years, the debt is still sustainable. We're taking a quick breather. We return very shortly. Stay with us.
Smart